Why should the United States, as a supposed uplifter of human rights, be allowing a politician in the Israeli Knesset who very openly promotes the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians to not only enter the United States, but to enter on the basis of raising money to complete his agenda of ethnic cleansing? On Monday, February 26th, hundreds of Israeli settlers carried out a series of violent attacks in the Palestinian village of Huwara, which is in the Nablus area of the occupied West Bank. The mob violence left 1 Palestinian dead, nearly 400 wounded, and dozens of homes and cars burned or destroyed. And the violence was essentially a pogrom, which is defined as a violent riot incited with the aim of massacring or expelling an ethnic or religious group. And it's defined as that by various human rights organizations. The Palestinian Red Crescent Medical Service reported that 37-year-old Palestinian Sameh Aktash was killed after being shot in the stomach by settlers during the rampage. His family claimed that because the army would not clear the road for an ambulance to reach him, he ended up bleeding to death. And during the rampage, 2 other Palestinians were shot and wounded, and another person was stabbed while a 4th was beaten with a metal bar. Commonly, these settler attacks are in conjunction with the Israeli occupation forces, who provided protection for settlers during the rampage. And in response to the attacks, Palestinian Prime Minister Mohammed Shatiyeh called for international intervention to hold those responsible accountable for these actions. But the Biden administration has refused to take any actions beyond expressing concern and calling for both sides to work together.
It's imperative in some ways now more than ever that Israelis and Palestinians work together, again, to de-escalate these tensions and to restore the calm.
And Israeli authorities arrested 10 suspects following the attack, but they later released 9. So no true accountability has been taken or given. Prior to the attacks in Huwara, Smotrich apparently liked a tweet posted by settler leader David Ben Zion, who said that the town of Huwara should be erased. And then when he was given a chance to explain himself the next day, Smotrich doubled down saying, and I quote, "I think that the town of Huwara needs to be erased. The state of Israel needs to do it, and not, heaven forbid, private citizens." So he's essentially saying that he believes that the town of Huwara should be burnt down and the settlers' violence is valid, but the settlers should not be responsible for essentially ethnically cleansing the town of Huwara, and that should be the responsibility of the Israeli government. So Smotrich, outside of his professional and political role, to Palestinians is a genocidal racist leader with a history of spreading anti-Palestinian hate and propaganda. But besides being a far-right extremist politician, he's known for his radical activism on anti-Palestinian and anti-LGBTQ hate. After the pogrom, Ned Price, who is the State Department spokesperson, he labeled the pogrom as vigilante violence, and he urged the Israeli government to pursue justice for the victims with equal rigor as other extremist attacks. But at the same time, Price welcomed Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and President Isaac Herzog's calls for Israelis not to take law enforcement into their own hands. So these 2 individuals said that Israelis should not take law enforcement into their own hands, aka Huwara should be ethnically cleansed, but not by the settlers, by the Israeli government instead. And Ned Price stated that we expect the Israeli government to ensure full accountability and prosecute those responsible for the attacks, in addition to compensation for the property. That's clearly not enough. Clearly, the State Department is doing its best not to upset the Israeli government as its biggest ally in the region. And the condemnation of Israel by the US is just not enough, period. Every time such an incident occurs, the State Department asks both sides, the Palestinians and Israelis, to work together to de-escalate violence. And that request is absurd beyond means, because when the State of Israel very clearly has a settler colonial occupation and apartheid agenda that it continuously and openly acts on, they don't only incite violence, they act on it consistently. So to ask the Palestinian people to work with their occupiers to de-escalate a violence that they did not initiate or instigate is beyond unethical. And in this instance specifically, it's quite literally like asking the Black community in the United States to cooperate and work with the KKK. The US has repeatedly welcomed Ukrainian resistance against Russia, but it condemns Palestinian resistance. So the double standard is incredibly evident. Human rights activists have argued for a while that Smotrich should be added to the US sanctions list in accordance with the 2016 Global Magnitsky Human Rights Accountability Act. This act was created to discipline individuals around the world who are accused of serious human rights violations by barring entry to the US and blocking of property. And now is the time to act on that act that the US itself created. But in short, when this country, the United States, prides itself on being an upholder of democracy and human rights, of course it has the responsibility to protect not only Palestinian Americans, but Palestinians as a whole. And yet it not only continues to pour into the relationship with our people's oppressors, but it enables them via unconditional military aid as opposed to holding them accountable in a real sustainable manner. Smotrich is expected to be in the US March 12th through the 14th, I believe, to speak at the Israel Bonds Conference and essentially raise money for his genocidal project. This is a true test for the US government. I think the US government is in a very shaky time right now. The last 2 years in itself have openly exposed the state of Israel and its agenda, from what happened in Gaza in 2021 until today. I mean, last year was one of the deadliest years for Palestinians, and we're only in March, and we're already exceeding that. And so what the United States decides to do in this instance, if they don't deny Smotrich, if they don't hold Israel accountable, if they don't go towards cutting funding, it says a lot about our own democracy. Is it a democracy? Do we actually uphold human rights? Do we actually care about human rights over our strategic interests? I think this is a true test for the United States, and it's getting very difficult day by day to hide and continue to stick to the status quo of supporting Israel blindly. So my name is Ayah Ziyadeh. I serve as the advocacy director for American Muslims for Palestine, as well as Americans for Justice and Palestine Action. I am Palestinian-American. My grandparents fled Palestine after the Nakba and went to Kuwait. So both of my parents were born in Kuwait. And then when Iraq invaded Kuwait, they had to move again and go to Jordan. So I was actually born in Jordan, but I was raised in the US and have been here my whole life. Support Palestine Deep Dive, 100% independent media, which is providing a vital space for Palestinians to reclaim their narrative.